house where you would have to go even at night, and you would have to try and get through the dark streets to get over there. And this one night, Carlo needed to go to the bathroom. He was only 3, and he slipped out of the house like he did often. And as he went out towards the latrines, when he turned the corner from his house, he saw a man with a gun like this. And he tried to get out of the shadow, but he was right where the man could see him. And so he froze against the wall of the house. And the man put his gun towards him, but his eyes didn't register on him, which was really odd because he was right there. And then the man moved out to another area and started shooting. He did not see Carlo, and Carlo ran back to the house. He had not had any gunshots towards him. He said, I remembered this Bible verse, and I had it memorized, and it said, no harm will overtake you, no disaster will come near your tent. He always claimed those Bible verses. Well, the next morning when he woke up, he heard wailing and crying all through the area where he lived. Now, Port-au-Prince is a big city, but people get used to their little square. This is where they go to the store, they get their food, and this is where they get their water, etc. And he said people were crying, and he heard gunshots all night. And he realized in the next morning that there'd been some kind of a rebellion on the streets. And that happens quite often in Port-au-Prince, especially Haiti, that there's rebellions. And they found out that hundreds of people had been shot that night, but he was spared. Well, that Christmas, Carlo had seen somebody on the bus hugging his grandmother, and he got obsessed with a grandmother. Oh, if he could just see his grandmother. His mother had left her behind in that little village when she'd come to Port-au-Prince, and he just wanted a grandmother. He talked it up over and over and over, and his mother just was getting kind of annoyed, but finally she agreed that she would let him go visit his grandmother. So they got on a bus, and then they had to walk like 6 hours through the brush and through the jungle and around the mountains to get to this little town and this little village. And there was his grandmother who lived on a farm. And his mother was really glad to know that he was out of the Port-au-Prince area. And so he was going to stay there for Christmas vacation. And he loved his grandmother. His grandmother was so happy to see him. He had a grandfather who had just died, but it was really peaceful. And he had so much fun playing with his cousins. I mean, he just was so used to being in the house and not being able to play. So he was really amazed at the fact that he could play out there without any fears, etc. There's something about not being in a neighborhood where you're afraid that somebody's going to hurt you, steal from you, fight you, whatever. And him and his cousin were up in a tree, and they were having a wonderful time, wonderful time. They were having so much fun. And his cousin said, come with me over here. And he didn't want to come because he was having a great time. He was acting like the tree that he was in was a horse. And so he was having a great time. But his cousin got mad that he didn't come with him. So she just yanked his arm out of the tree, and he fell down. And when he fell down, he fell on this rock. And he says that it's a rock that's like a pumice stone that you would take the rough areas of your feet calluses off or whatever. It was one of those, and he got scraped, and he hurt his arm so badly. He screamed, and his grandmother came to see him. She knew that he was really hurt, and he didn't know what he did to his arm. But as the day went on, it was very painful. There was no doctors in the area, and it was so sore and so painful. And as I said, religion is mixed up with voodoo and all over there. So the grandmother was really concerned about him. She decided that she was going to take him to they call them leaf doctors. And leaf doctors are like herbologists. However, they do this voodoo stuff. And so when he saw him, he did all these things, these incantations and blowing smoke on his arm. And he took this palm frond. You've seen those yellowy paper things that come out of palm trees. And he put it on that arm very, very, very tightly. And he told him, don't take this off your arm. And so it was really sad. But after a while, the arm didn't heal. In fact, it was so tight. What happens when you put something so tight on your arm? You cut off your circulation. He was miserable. And after a few days, he was sleeping on a couch. He started to get a fever. He started to get sick. And his uncle could smell something. His arm was dying. It was decaying. And his arm was decaying so bad that actually Carlo was starting to get like in a coma where he couldn't talk and he was feverish. His grandmother was terrified because she thought, what will his mother, by the way, his mother had gone back to Port-au-Prince because she needed to sell. So she had left him there with the grandmother. And she was worried. The grandmother was afraid that she'd never let Carlo come again if something happened. But the uncle said, we have got to go to Port-au-Prince as the only place where he can get any medical help. Actually, we have an Adventist hospital there. And they didn't know about it, but I think they ended up going to that hospital. And Carlo was so bad that a whole bunch of people from the village had to help carry him over all the jagged areas and over the mountains and through the jungle. It took 6 or more hours before they could get to a bus, and the bus would take them the rest of the way to Port-au-Prince. And once there, they would have to try and find his mother, because even there, they have to have a mother's permission to treat your child. And so they had to go find the mother on the street, explain to her what was going on. And she finally came over to the hospital, and the hospital said, the surgeon said, I will need to save his life by cutting his arm off. By then, the decay had gone all the way up to his shoulder. It was on his right arm, and he was right-handed. Well, a lot of the people in Port-au-Prince, when you are disabled, it is a terrible thing. It means that the gods hate your family, that the devil doesn't want you to live, that you probably amputated your kid's arm just so that you could go out and sell on the street and get sympathy. And people also, when they're hungry, they don't want to take care of kids that are going to be needy and have dependencies on them. So it was a terrible situation. His mother did not want his arm removed, but the doctor said, he only has like a day of life. You either let me remove the arm or he will die. And so the mother finally agreed to let him remove the arm, and it was all the way up to the shoulder. It was a very sad accident to have such a terrible damage. So many of the people showed really hateful attitudes to Carlo as a little boy. He was only 4. And he had to relearn how to eat, how to dress himself, how to work. His mother did not want him to be dependent on her. And so she was very, very stern with him. He had to do everything that his older brother did, from washing dishes to scrubbing floors to cleaning and sweeping. She did not give him any leniency. She kept telling him, you can do anything that anybody else can do. And he learned to feed himself, and he was supposed to go to the hospital because you're supposed to get fresh dressings on all these injuries. But the hospital was a long way from his shack, a long way. And it's hot in Haiti, a hot summer sun, and they didn't have that much food. And one day the mother had no money for a taxi fare, but his arm was, the bandages were wet and he needed to get those changed. And so she stepped out and got to a taxi. And as I said, it was a really hot day. And so she asked the taxi if they would give them a free ride to the hospital. And when the man looked at Carlo and saw that he was disabled, he said, why don't you just put him in front of my car and I'll gladly run over him and get rid of him for you. And she said, no. He said, well, we can act like it's an accident and then you won't have to take care of him. And she said, no, I'm not going to do that. And she was very fearful for his life because there were people who just wanted to get rid of him because he's a financial burden. And it was really hard for a mother who didn't have much support to raise a child that was needy. So a few weeks later, she knew she had to go visit his father because she needed money. She was desperate for money, and she was desperate for his treatment. The father was enraged when he saw Carlo without an arm. He said, this is not my son. I never had a son that was disabled. I don't want anything to do with him. And then he said, why don't you take him out on a boat ride and just drown him in the ocean? And then he said, and while you do that, you didn't have my permission to take him to your mother out in that village where this happened. Why don't you just drown yourself too, and your other son as well? And so from that day on, she knew that she better never be around him, because she really felt that he wanted to kill her. And of course, his wife definitely wanted to kill her and was doing a lot of incantations to get rid of them. She never ever returned to the bakery again to see him, and Carlo never saw his father again. Well, Genevieve got married. She married a Seventh-day Adventist, a brand new Seventh-day Adventist. But he wasn't a very good Seventh-day Adventist. He dragged her to church, but he didn't give up his behavior. You know, there are many people who get convicted about the gospel, but they're not converted. And he was convicted, and he wanted to look good, and he would go to church, and he would act like he was a really good member, but he at home was very jealous. He was a womanizer. He liked other women. He would even drag Carlo and his hurt his mother, and many times he would stand in between them. He would often get injured, and so would his brother. And finally, his stepfather left the family. But he said that he was so hungry, he would go to his aunt. That, remember the crabby aunt? The mother was, kicked out of her house. And he would try to do all kinds of tasks for her, and he would sell on the street because he just wanted some food, and she would sometimes share his food. The stepfather he was angry at the wife one time, and he tried to, his relatives tried to poison her. So she got very fearful of eating because they always wanted to get her out of the life. So he would wake up in the morning, and sometimes there were voodoo offerings right outside the door of their shack, and he knew that they wanted their life. He said it was a very frightening time. Now, he went to the Adventist hospital, and the doctor saw that he didn't have an arm, and he said to him, there is a place where you can get an education because you are disabled. It's an Episcopal place called St. Vincent's, and they take children that are disabled. And his mother was really excited. She didn't know how she was going to get him there with the bus pass, but he got there, and somehow sometimes he would walk, and he would be beaten when he was late. And then it became appropriate where they asked him if he'd like to stay in the dorm. He said that the dorm was about 30 kids in one room, many of them blind, unable to clean and wash themselves, a little bucket to pee in, and a latrine outside. He said it was hard. Kids were hungry. They were tired. Sometimes they had come from really rough areas. It was hard, but he said he was able to have an education, and he was so thankful. And he didn't always get a textbook. So when he would get his textbook, he would memorize all the words because it was so exciting to have it. And if you did not have your lessons memorized, you were beaten at school. He said that the staff, by the way, he started to dislike his own people because he said they were the ones that were mean. They were the ones who stole his food. This doesn't happen everywhere. It's never cool to just say this bias. But the people at that school were really rough, and they were very abusive. But he loved the fact that there were missionaries that came over from the U.S., and they were always kind to the children. Sometimes they'd read to the children. Sometimes they'd bring food and little snacks and little candies for them. And they just got so that they loved the people that would visit. He said that donors would bring them fruits and vegetables and things like that, but the staff stole them, and that they would only get an unflavored mush every day. And sometimes he could eat it, and sometimes he couldn't eat it. They wondered why the children were always losing weight, but nobody could know. They weren't allowed to tell about what was going on. Now, there were street kids that he went to school with. They were rough and they were angry, and they were allowed to intimidate the younger children. But he still says, I was so thankful for an education. His mother dreamed that someday he would go to the United States and he would be able to study something and he could make some money for himself and get out of poverty. That was his dream. So he just was so thrilled that he could be in a place where he was educated. There was a prison across the street, and men were kept there, sometimes without trials, for years and years. You'd hear them wailing and crying and singing, and they were often tortured and begging for help. And he said sometimes it was hard to sleep at night because you could hear all those noises. Carlo was just, again, so happy to be able to get an education. And he would often help the other students with their work because he felt really bad when they didn't memorize their textbooks and would get hit. There were no lights in the city at night because there were so many gangs. They just didn't want people to have lights on so that their houses could be hit or shot at. But he would find lights at a local gas station so that he could really study his textbook. He was so diligent about studying. The Haitian staff at St. Vincent's would make the kids write letters to donors in the U.S., telling about their lives. And then when those letters came back with money, they would open the envelopes, take all the money, put it in their pocket, and then tell the kids to write another letter. So he always said that it was really sad that the kids never got any of that money. One time he was in church. You were forced to go to church. And he said he liked to go to church. But some kid asked him something, so he answered. And the man that was watching them, supervising them, had a terrible anger problem. And he grabbed Carlo by the hair and he dragged him outside and he beat him and he injured him. He beat him for about 10 minutes. And when Carlo was done, he could hardly walk. The kids tried to help him back to his bed. And he said, because Carlo had a faith in God because of those Bible verses, he said, in my mind, I thought, no, God must be crying to see how that man was treating me. I know God is not honored when something like this happened. And it was really sad, but Carlo was always happy to be at that school despite all the good things that were going on. When he was in 4th grade, his mother came to visit him one day, and she said, we need to get you a passport so you can go to America someday. And he said, how will I ever do that? And she said, I don't know. He said, it's going to cost money. And a lot of times over there, you have to bribe people and all these things. And she didn't have the money to do that. She was really quiet. But she said, I just want you to escape poverty. And I'm so glad that you get food here because my children back at home are not getting food as we are living alone and we're living very poorly. He prayed harder that he would go to the USA someday, but how? And there was a time when his mother was going to have a baby after his father died, and he couldn't figure out why she didn't come back one day. And he found her outside of a hospital on the sidewalk. She had gotten to the hospital, but they wouldn't admit her. She had been laying in the heat. She was almost about to have the baby. She had no water and no food, and he was very worried about her. He was able to get them to take her into the hospital, but when they went into the hospital, he waited 3 hours, and they still would not give her any food or water. So he went to his aunt. His aunt was being a real biscuit, and she said, I can't believe that your mother's pregnant again. And she didn't want to do anything, but he finally talked her into giving her some food and some water. And he came back, and his mom ate like she was starving to death, and she gave birth to his youngest sister within a few hours. It's really hard to be poor and uninsured. On his way back to school that day, well, in Haiti, they love music, and he saw this on the street that day, a parade, and it was Flag Day, and they were celebrating Flag Day, and there was this makeshift type band, and they were playing instruments. They were old, junky instruments with a drum and everything, and he said, I looked at the man playing a trumpet, and I dared to dream that I could actually one day hold a trumpet and play a trumpet. But of course, he said, I am a young boy from poverty. Why would I be able to ever do that? That would never happen. And when he got back to school, he found out that when he would be 11, he would be allowed to be in a band. And he was so excited. By now, he was 9. And he's just so excited. He kept asking if he could go early, and they said no. And so the year that he was 11, he couldn't wait. The first day of school, everybody was dismissed, but they told him, Carlos, sit still. Just sit down. And the entire class went. And he said to his teacher, what am I supposed to do? And he said, you don't have an arm. There's nothing for you to play. You just work on your homework. He said, oh, I know I can play. I've watched people play. And he said, nope, I'm sorry. And do you know that every day of that school year, he begged to play the trumpet or any instrument that they would give him. But every day they told him, no, you can't play that. And every day went on for the entire school year. Do you know that it was 4 long school years before one day when he asked, a teacher was visiting in his classroom, and the teacher said, oh, this kid thinks that he can play a trumpet. Why don't you give him an old rusty trumpet and let him practice? So remember, his friends were playing, and they'd been playing for 4 years when he finally got an opportunity. Now, he was hungry, but he wasn't going to, you can only have that trumpet while you were at school. So he wasn't going to go eat the slop, he said, in the cafeteria. He would rather take all of his breaks, his lunchtime and everything to go play that trumpet. And he worked really, really hard. He tried with one hand, his left hand, that's right, with his left hand to try and hold that trumpet up and play. And he actually made some notes, and he practiced and he practiced and he practiced. And pretty soon he practiced so much that his other friends were starting to ask him questions about the trumpet. And he started to teach some of them who had already had 4 years. And he started to do so well. He loved the sound of the trumpet. He was so excited. And he was just thrilled because they chose him when a big international choir came to town if he would play a solo for this beautiful music. And the music was in Port-au-Prince with this big choir, and he played this song. And because of all the TV cameras that day, Garlot Dorve got known as a one-armed trumpet person. And he started to be asked even to come to the president's palace and play. And so he became quite good, and he knew that the Lord was helping him. A year later, professors from Wisconsin came to St. Vincent's, and they saw how serious he was about playing that trumpet. And his one professor, Bob Levy, was so impressed with his persistence. He's like, I would want to help this young man. So he took the trumpet. He went home, and he got a trumpet made for him with a ring on it where he could hold it up with one finger and push the buttons. And then he brought him, and he said, he brought that trumpet to him. And he said, one day I know you're going to come to the United States and you're going to play for big audiences. And so he dared to dream how he could escape poverty. And his mother was so excited too. His mother just had dreams that someday her son was going to go to another country. And he loved the missionaries that came. But as I said, he didn't have any ability or any money to do anything. And he wanted to make his mom proud of him because, she'd been raising a child that was disabled. And he wanted her to know that he was doing what she dreamed. Well, one day he was at his dormitory, and his brother came, his older brother. Now, by the way, his brothers and sisters could not afford education. He was the only one that was getting education. So they were really excited about it for him. And his brother came and said, we've got a problem. And he said, what's the problem? And he said, I went to our house, and our brothers and sisters, because his brother had moved out of the house by then, they were home. They are starving. They have not had any food, anything for 2 days. And our mother has disappeared. We can't find her anywhere. So Garlot and him went all over looking. They never found their mother. They assumed that she was killed in another uprising, and that many times in Haiti, they just sweep those bodies into a grave, and they don't even tell the next of kin where they're at. So he never saw them. And his brother, who had been living on his own, moved back in to take care of his brothers and sisters, and he also helped. Well, Garlot graduated from high school, and he wondered if he could ever get a scholarship. Well, there were a lot of friends that he had. And by this time, he'd become a Seventh-day Adventist because he'd gone to church and he'd listened to the sermons, even though his stepfather had become such a bad person and had left the church. Actually, stepfather got into a financial issue, and he said he would dedicate his life to the devil if the devil gave him money. And when he got some money, he said, okay, I'm going to serve the devil now. And so he left. Anyway, so Carlo became an Adventist, and he was nurtured by a lot of the people in the church. One day he went to church and he went through some puddles and his shoes fell apart. And so he stopped coming to church. And you know exactly what should happen. An elder came to visit him in the dormitory and said, why are you not in church? And he said, because I don't have shoes to wear and everybody looks so nice on Sabbath. And he said, we don't serve God because we have clothing. We serve him because we love him. And so Carlo went to church again. And he was really encouraged that people loved him. And he was a man of prayer. He became a very steady prayer. And so he found some friends at his high school who also were praying about their future. And they would go to the mountains up away from the school, and they would pray for hours about what that would happen. He just kept thinking, this is God's plan for me to get out of this area. And he heard that he got a scholarship at a Catholic university. He was very excited. That was going to be in Louisiana. And then he heard that some of his friends who really wanted the scholarship themselves actually had told them that, well, he will never play on the Sabbath and he will never eventually become any kind of a musician. So why would you put your money into him? And he lost the scholarship. Well, he couldn't imagine what would happen. He was so sad. He said, you know, God must have another plan. And he was really faithful. He just figured, I don't know. Then somebody asked him to go to Scotland on a tour. And luckily, he got a passport because that was coming up. And then the tour got canceled. So he was really devastated again. Well, in December, somebody was going to go to Flint, Michigan, which is where there's another university. And they were going to have some exchange students. They were getting 4 young men from the school in Haiti. And they were going to have them do like a cultural exchange to share their music with the people there in that public university. But one of the young men got sick. And they said, you know, we need somebody who's willing to go who would have a passport. Well, he had a passport. And all the other young men in his class did not because they hadn't been planning to go to that Scotland trip. And so they said to him, would you like to go to Michigan? And he said, absolutely. And he knew that it was only for like 3 weeks. So what was the big deal? But you know what? Why not? He was so excited. And so he went and he got there. And within a very short time, he was there with those 4 people in the cold, no coat, ice, snow, all of that. And somebody brought him coats. They were really glad. They'd only been there a few days. When they went to the classroom that next week for their first time, the people there said, I'm really sorry about the earthquake in your country. He said, what earthquake? She said, well, you had a devastating, they didn't have a TV, they didn't have a radio, they didn't have a telephone. They were just stuck at this house where they brought them. And she said, you know, your country's been devastated. Thousands have been dead, and they couldn't even function. Was their families, were they all dead? You know, he'd lost already his mother, he'd lost father, he'd lost his stepfather, anybody. And he had only his brothers and sisters. And they called all day. People let them use their phones, and they found out that their brothers and sisters were alive. But the school where they played and where they practiced their music, it all went down. And their classmates had all perished. You see, Carlo got out three or 4 days before that earthquake. And they were practicing that day. And so he could have died with all of them. There were just loads of people that had died. He couldn't believe when he heard how many people had died, but God saved his life and got him out. But now what was he going to do? He really didn't have a country and he didn't have a place to live. And when that schooling experience was over, what was he going to do? And there were people that he met at an Adventist church there in Flint area who found out that he was hungry. He would come and play the trumpet, and they would be really gracious. One gave him a job working on a garbage truck. And he would go to the grocery store and start begging and ask for tips. And they said, "What are you doing?" He said, "I just need to eat." And he had no sponsor and no family. But you know what? The U.S. Department decided to give them a Social Security card so they could work, and they gave him a temporary protected visa just to work because there was no place for them to go home. So they worked. And he continued to go to that church. And one day at that church, there was a woman that was visiting, and he spoke very little English, by the way. But she said when he was playing, she loved his beautiful music. And she asked, "Would you ever be interested in going to Michigan State University?" Well, he said, well, of course he would be. You know, he had all the, but she said, "Well, would you mind if I set an appointment up with a trumpet professor for you?" And he said, "Sure." But he didn't have a ride, didn't have a job, couldn't get there. Some time went by, and he got another appointment with that trumpet professor. And the trumpet professor was very impressed. The trumpet professor said, "If you had a full scholarship, would you ever come to our university?" And he said, "Well, yeah." They go, "Well, would you ever go somewhere else?" He's like, no, I'd come here." He didn't have any other offers. And he thought, but what would I do? Because I would need transportation. So you get a full scholarship, but you don't get room and board. You don't get books. You don't get clothing. You don't get the things that you need, like tuxedos for performances and all of that. And he was having a really hard time. But he prayed and he fasted, and the Lord opened up the door. He met a man on a video that liked his video, and his name, he was a wonderful person, and one of his friends was Wynton Marsalis. Now, Wynton Marsalis is one of the most famous trumpeters of our day, and he won like 9 Grammy Awards in jazz and classical music. I don't know if anybody ever listens to the morning show in the mornings on Sunday, and you hear this trumpet go do 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 do. I don't know. Anyway, that's Wynton Marsalis. He's everywhere. And his friends said, "I think you should meet Wynton Marsalis." And he's like, "Right, yeah, right." So he was living in Flint, and Wynton Marsalis was coming to Michigan State. Carlos still wasn't at Michigan State. He had to learn better English before he could come. And so he was supposed to meet Wynton Marsalis. Now, Wynton is very popular. And so when he came and Wynton had an appointment with him, he was busy, and people talked to him all evening. And Carlos sat there. It was a cold winter night. He had a ride, and his ride said he wanted to leave. And so he said, I'm going to have to leave. And somebody went over and talked to Wynton. He said, "I'll make sure he gets home." And so he told his ride goodbye. He was really scared. And it was well past midnight. It was like 1 in the morning. And it was time for Wynton to leave. And he said, "Why don't you come with me and we'll take you home in the limo?" So he drove with him in the limo, and they talked the whole time. And he said, "Carlo, you look like a really wonderful person. I've been hearing a lot of good things about you. What could I do for you?" And Carlos said, "Well, I know that you can't give lessons because you're too busy." And he said, "But, you know, one of the things is that I'm going to probably start Michigan State in January." And he said, "I don't have any room and board." And Wynton said, "How much will it be?" He said, "About $13,000 a year." And he said, "Where do I send my check?" And for 4 years, Wynton Marsalis paid his check for room and board. Well, I saw him at the East Lansing Church because Carlo was very busy with ministries. Carlo was a real soul winner. He went to one of the schools for soul winning, and he said, you know, he learned all of these lessons about witnessing. And Carlo had like 100 Bible studies going at Michigan State when he was there. He had a little pouch on his door where they could get glow tracks, and so he was witnessing. He talked to a jazz band guy who became a minister in West Virginia, now is in Washington. He talked to a young girl who was Japanese, and she was into biblical languages. She married one of our pastors in Michigan now after she's an Adventist. He talked to a Chinese girl at the bus stop. She became an Adventist. She went home to China and started a church. He was really quite a personal ministries guy. We couldn't get over how many experiences he had. But one thing that we noticed is when I saw him at the East Lansing church, he looked really poor. He had unmatched clothing on. And I asked, because I love to have a table at Thanksgiving where I have visitors. I have a small family, and so we always invited visitors. And we actually, at Michigan State, I was in a part of a group, and we would invite international students to our house, but we invited him that year. And he came, and what I recognized is that he had no family. He was a wonderful young man. What was the name of the big institution in New York he wouldn't go and play at?
Carnegie Hall.
Carnegie Hall. He wouldn't play. His teachers were giving him a hard time. He wouldn't go to Carnegie Hall because they had a practice on a Friday night, and his teachers were really angry at him, but he continued to be a witness. So anyway, Carlo was just so amazing that I thought, I was going to speak at Great Lakes Adventist Academy because they wanted me to talk on self-esteem. And I thought, well, why don't I bring Carlo? Anyone that goes around with no arm must have some self-esteem issues, but he seems to be weathering it quite well. And he went to Great Lakes Academy with me, and the kids loved him. And he played the music, and it was amazing. We emceed a wedding, and he played this beautiful music for a pastor's wedding. It was just amazing. People were spellbound. I heard them talking about him everywhere I went. And then I heard people making up rumors. I heard he got bit by a snake, or I heard that he got his arm into a machine and it ate it up. And it's just amazing how people have all these little theories. But we started to have him at our church because I wanted to take him to get clothing. Now, my husband said, he's a young man. You can't just take some boy in your car. That just doesn't look good. So I took my mother with me. She's in her 80s at that point, and we would take him, and we went and got clothing. He was driving an old bike with no brakes and no lights with one hand, and he'd left his one glove in my car that night, and then he had to go to school the next one. It was just so sad. And then I realized he needed a trumpet case, and then I realized he needs a suit. And the more that you know how it is? The more that I recognized his need, the more attached he got to me. And then that was really nerve-wracking. Just because you help somebody, you don't want them to get attached to you. It's like a chicken that comes out of the egg and it doesn't see its mother, and it just looks at the person that's helping them. And I'm like, he's getting a little bit too attached. Well, my mother said, he is never leaving this house. As far as I'm concerned, he needs to be with us. And anyway, the more that we talked to him, we started to help him with getting a checking account and a credit card, and we helped him drive. Oh my, have you ever driven with somebody with one arm? It was frightening. And then people in his church said, he thinks of you as his mother. I'm like, oh, well, I'm just a friend. And so then he actually called me mother, and I said, call me mother friend. I'm not your mother. You had a mother, and I'm just your friend. And you can call me because I'm kind of a mother figure, but I'm not your mother. And then he started calling my mother Granny, and she just loved it. She would never let anybody else call her Granny, but he could do it anyway. And she always had these little sayings, these American sayings, like, we need to get him home before he turns into a pumpkin. And he's like, I'm not going to turn into a pumpkin. He couldn't figure it out. And he had a girlfriend, and my mom said, she's cuter than a bug's ear. Have you ever heard that? He's like, what's a bug's ear? And we just laughed about all that. We were telling him about Cinderella, and he's like, that's a weird story. Yeah, just things. It was just funny how he just thought everything was so unusual. And then I recognized how he needed money. So I took him out to a lot of places. Actually, Angela and her husband, Dave, are here. I took him to a lot of places throughout Michigan, right? Because he needed money. And then I realized that, well, maybe he needed a book so he could sell his book. So I wrote a book, and then he started selling his book, and he was, going all over selling his book. And then I thought, well, he probably needs a CD. I spent so much time. I'm busy. Did I ever tell you I'm a busy woman? I had a therapy practice. I have a grown daughter. I have a husband who's a minister, and he was going all over Michigan. And like, I'm busy, but I kept spending time with him. And he was almost like the girl I never had. I have a daughter, and she's really capable and a great lady, but Carlo loves to talk. And he like has to talk for 3 hours before he decides what to do. And he would call me at 10 at night. I'm like half asleep every morning. My husband's like, you're sleeping in longer all the time. I'm just like, I had to talk to Carlo, and I don't want him to think that I abandoned him too. And he kept saying, mother friend. And he's like, mother friend, I need a fingerprint for the country. And mother friend, I'm like, oh my, this is so much work to have him in my life. And so everywhere I went, because I was speaking at churches every weekend, because Michigan Conference gave me some money so that I could help pastors with multiple districts. And so most of these churches are the little churches. Have you ever been to little churches? You probably are used to only this big church, right? In Michigan, one little church has the pianist and the other one has the elder. And there just isn't any music there. And I thought, well, maybe I could bring them. Well, then my husband's like, now, I just don't think it's appropriate for you to be bringing a young man all over Michigan, just you and him. So I got my friends. You see all my friends? And so we would fill the van, and then they all got attached, and he started calling it auntie. No, he called him auntie Kim and Auntie Carolyn. And then they all got so attached, and we just kept getting involved with him. It was just crazy. And it was like, he just started getting into my life all the time. And I just said, I don't know what to do with this. And, the Bible says, 2 Timothy 2:4, don't let yourself get tied up in the affairs of life. And I wasn't really understanding what that meant for my life. But anyway, by the way, do you know what the acronym is? An acronym is busy. Do you know what busy's acronym is? Busy is being under Satan's yoke. And I realized that I needed to be busy helping this young man. I mean, he had so little. And by the time I had written his book, he got so attached because he went through all these tears, crying over all these things that he'd been putting away. And, it was just perfect because I'm a therapist. I could help him through it. I'm like, okay, Lord, I get the feeling that you really want me to be involved with him. And of course, I felt love for him. I did. I just felt love for him. And I just admired him. He has no inhibitions. He kept telling me, I love you, mother friend. I love you. I'm like, don't tell everybody that. And he witnessed to wherever we went, he would talk to people. Like a waitress would come to the table and he would say, so are you from a university? Oh, yes. Well, can I connect you with somebody, give you a Bible study? Are you willing? And everywhere I went, I just thought it was amazing. I'm like, aren't you ashamed to witness? And he's like, well, they can either say no or yes. What's the big deal, mother? I mean, Jesus was, why would I get embarrassed for Jesus? I'm like, so it was really amazing. Well, my daughter was here in Tennessee, and I just thought that it would be really good if I included her in meeting Carlo. And so I asked her if she wanted to come to a women's retreat back in Michigan. And she said, yeah, she would love to come. And I said, and I want you to know that there's this young man that we've been bringing over from Michigan State, and I'd like you to meet him. He calls me mother friend. She said, are you kidding? I said, nope, I'm not his mother, but he likes to think that I am. And she's like, well, that's a little funny. But she came, and wouldn't you know that curly-haired boy and my little redhead, did I tell you she married 20 years ago, so she's not young? They're actually a year apart in age. And he kept pulling her hair from the back of the chair when he'd walk by. And she started going after him, and they became such good buddies. And then they wanted to show me something on the computer. And so they were on the computer, and she said, Mom, what do you think about this website? And Carlo's like, mother friend, what do you think? And right then, the Lord talked to me. Now, I've been a therapist for almost 35 years. And in my practice, I've had a lot of people. And people would often come in and say, my father had an affair with somebody, and then he left our family. And I don't know if I'm really his family because he went on with a new family, and I always felt left out. Or they'd say, I'm a half sister or a half brother. And what does that mean? I'm not a full child to my step parent. Or, I was adopted. And my parents, I know they love me, but I just never really felt Like they really loved me enough. This is why these people were the ones with problems. That's why they came for counseling. And so I had this understanding from God that this thing of telling Carlo to call me mother friend was another way I was kind of rejecting him. And then I told my husband, I'm going to tell him that he can call me mother. And my husband said, well, what does that mean? That's a pretty heavy responsibility. I said, I understand. He said, well, do what you want. So I went in and I said, Carlo, do you mind if I allow you to call me mother instead of mother friend? He said, no, thanks, Mom. He went on to do something. And like from then on, I was his mother. Well, my husband wasn't always thrilled. He just didn't know what to think about it all. He was really busy with his career. And, he was busy doing all this stuff. I wrote that book for him. This is the book. I got ahead of my notes a little bit. And we did an album. This is him at the Collegedale Church. I have to think about, the Chattanooga First Church, when he was signing his books and all. And then he graduated from Michigan State. But anyway, Carlo continued to have some issues. But I wanted to tell you about my husband, who's here. So what I didn't know, so Carlo went to do a commercial in England. He was asked because it was the Paralympics. Have you ever heard of that? And they had some big advertisement in British television because it was going to be in Argentina or something that year. And they wanted to do this multi-million-dollar commercial so that people would watch it on the British television programs. And so Carlo went over his birthday, which was May 15. He graduated from Michigan State that year. And he was on his way to that area. And so I called him that day and I said, happy birthday, son. And he said, thank you. And then he said, did you know your husband called me? And I said, no. He said, yeah. He said, you know what he said to me? I said, yeah. He said, happy birthday. He said, not completely. I said, what did he say? He said, happy birthday, son. And I went, he did? He did? So why don't you come up and tell him how you got to that point?
Well, we happen to have a men's weekend at our school, Great Lakes Academy.
I don't think that you can hear.
Shortly before that, and during the
Can you hear him?
Can you hear me? Okay. And during that time, during the presentation, it was just a Sabbath afternoon, and Sabbath afternoon, and somewhere along the time, the speaker was addressing all of us men and said, there are a lot of young people who really need someone to be in control of and to help them, mentor them and help them to get along in life. And so he asked for us to make a commitment that if God put somebody in our lives, that we would be willing to mentor them. Well, you can do the math. And I did make that commitment, and that was just before his birthday. And so when that particular time happened, and I called him on his birthday, it was because God had hit her over the head, and he hit me over the head too. We realized that, well, he needs to be part of our family.
Mm-hmm. It's still a very emotional time, and we love him. He's like the apple of our eye. By the way, he was made the alumnus of the year. He was made alumnus of the year at Michigan State University. They loved him there. This is my kids that are in the area. And when I had my birthday party, we, when I was turning the big 6-0, we let everybody know that he was now our son. People were really shocked. This is him when he was doing the commercial in England. And I thought I'd just it's not a Sabbathy thing. Let me see if I can do this. I don't think I can. Yeah, you might want to see it sometime, but it is an amazing commercial where all these people with disabilities did this commercial, and they were dancing, playing the piano, playing the guitar, racing cars. They were in airplanes, and Carlo was the trumpeter up there in the balcony, always playing. And so it was pretty amazing. And it's called Yes, You Can. And it was an amazing commercial. We had his first birthday. This is his first birthday. He was so excited. Yeah. And then I had this issue where I got really sick. It was a really hard time, but I got through it. But he was pretty distressed over that. And in the end, everything worked out. So we wanted to just close. Oh, this is his graduation at Penn State because he got his master's there. And this is Bob Levy, who was the one who got him the trumpet with the ring on it, who said, I knew he was going to make it. I knew he was going to make it. Which, by the way, Carlo went to the University of Missouri, and he got a doctorate in music education. But while he was getting that doctorate, he met Kiana, and I'm sorry, Kiera. We have a Kiana in our church, and I always get that mixed up. It's not very popular when you call her the wrong name. But she's a physician, and he found out that he can't just follow her around. He has to find a university job somewhere else. So he's decided that maybe he'll do something more than music. So he's back at Michigan State on a full scholarship, getting a master's in business right now. And my husband married him. It was a very special time. It was right during COVID. And they are happy. Oh, she's got some background where she needed some loving too because of a really troubled family, and they are just as happy as can be. We couldn't have asked for somebody more wonderful. So here they are, both doctors, and we're really proud of them. This is some missionaries that knew him when they were at the school, and they would come over there, and they are kind of like parents to him as well in Connecticut. We had to share him with other people. Carlo, I just wanted to show you that when I knew him, he was thin and he just looked pretty gaunt. And you can see the transformation of being loved and having a family. Things are really different for him. And our family, you know, he just fit in, and so did Kiera. We just love them. We are so happy to have them. My mom keeps saying, we wouldn't trade you for all the tea in China. So at his wedding, we had to have a tea place with a big sign about the tea in China because he just loved that. He kept saying, I love you, Grandma, more than all the tea. And he always makes a new country. West Virginia. I'm like, Carla, that's a state, not a, yeah. I love you more than all the tea in Russia. I'm like, I don't know that they have tea, but they have a lot of bourbon there. So anyways, but my mother just loved Carlo, and we all love him. But I just think that it's really important for you to know that he went on, he's done great things at 3ABN and all, and I thought maybe you'd like to hear a little bit of his music. This is just a video they did at Penn State. it to go too long. Are you thinking too long? Okay. I think you can get the idea that he's very gifted. We love him. He's just perfect in our family. He saw, I put the little poster that I was going to be here tonight talking about him, and he saw that and he called me. He goes, "Mother, am I going to have to charge you for using my story?" So anyway, but we love him. We think that the Lord has sent people out there for us to mentor and to witness to. We've learned a lot from Carlo because he's a persistent witness. When he was at the University of Missouri, he got in trouble because he was supposed to be ahead of the marching band, and he would leave on Sabbath because it was Friday night, and when it was sundown, he would always take off. And he was really worried because he was asked to come speak to the faculty, and when he got into the room, all the faculty were at a long table, and they told him to go ahead and sit right there at the front of the table. And he thought, I'm losing my scholarship, my teaching assistants, and all that. And they said, "Carlo, we understand that you've been leaving early because of the Sabbath, and we'd like to hear more about your Sabbath." And he said, "I felt like I had a whole audience, so I told them about the Sabbath from creation. Mother, I went on for 45 minutes. Their eyes were as big as pancakes." And then he said, "I ended with the cross, and I said to them, I'm not causing one more sin to be on on Jesus's shoulders because I disobeyed the Sabbath." And he told him, "And I won't do that for anybody." And so he said, the head of the department said, "Carlo, we wouldn't make you either. We're going to hire somebody else to do your job on your Sabbath, and we'll work with you. And thank you for letting us know you won't have any more problems anymore." So we are pretty amazed at his seriousness about the gospel, and we're encouraged. It's not only wonderful to bring in a child that inspires you as well, that's pretty impressive, but we hope that if you have somebody in your midst that needs to be befriended, that you will also think about that. Could I have you have the prayer?
Why don't we stand together? Father in heaven, we want to thank you for your Sabbath. And we've been reminded that this young man, Carlo, has made a commitment to serve you and also to honor your Sabbath and to be faithful to you. And you've been faithful to him, and you've done a lot of things for him, for us, and we know that you will continue to lead us day by day. We pray that you will give us a good rest of the Sabbath, that you continue to direct in our lives, and that you will prepare us for the return of Jesus. We know that day is coming very soon. And we pray that as we leave this place this evening, that you'll give us your care and protection. And we thank you in Jesus' name.
Amen. So I just thought I'd share with you that Kiera, his wife, is doing her fellowship in Chicago right now, and she's got her new job. She'll be delivering babies in Milwaukee at the University of Milwaukee Hospital. So she'll be all done with her residency, her fellowship, and now she's starting a doctor's job. And he drives back and forth from Michigan State to see her every weekend, which he's there right now. So anyway, thank you, and I'm glad that I got to know you. I look forward to maybe seeing you tomorrow. Thank you.